I'm Nacanieli, a student in PS305. Today I'm talking about religious coping versus professional support in mental health. Specifically comparing depression coping mechanism amongst university students in Fiji aged 18 to 31 years. As mentioned, I'm your presenter, Cavu Nacanieli, lecturer. It's Dr. Levent. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to fulfill two key learning objectives. First, differentiating how spiritual reframing and clinical CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, operates uniquely within a specific context. And second, evaluating the structural necessity of a hybrid mental health model for our tertiary institutions. Let's begin. To guide us through this evaluation, our agenda today is structured into four main parts. We will begin by establishing the religious context and the socio-cultural shifts affecting our target demographic. Next, we will Next, we will break down our two competing explanatory frameworks, which we will refer to as Theory A and Theory B. Following that, we will look critically at the methodological blind spots and Western psychometric biases found in existing literature. Finally, we will synthesize these findings to see how they resolve against each other and outline a path forward using an integrated hybrid care model. Moving on. Let's look at our specific target demographic. We are focusing strictly on undergraduate and postgraduate students in Fiji aged 18 to 31 who are experiencing mild to moderate depression, academic burnouts, or a severe loss of motivation. This group is caught in a profound socio-cultural transition as young people move away from the traditional, relational, and collective structures of village life to enter highly urbanized, comparative, tertiary environments. They face immense psychological strain. So most of the students here in Fiji, they transition from a maritime lifestyle to a fast-paced city life, which would contribute to their stress factors. They are suddenly forced to balance deep-rooted communal expectations with modern, highly individualistic academic demands. Dual world of support. When these students experience mental distress, they generally have to navigate two completely separate, non-communicating systems of relief. On one side, they have formal faith-based support networks that rely on prayer, scriptural reading, and communal reassurance. On the other side, they have formal institutions and formal institutional resources such as university counselors, counseling centers that provide Western-style talk therapy. Because these two worlds rarely coordinate, students are frequently forced to make an agonizing choice, often choosing informal coping simply because formal clinic spaces carry intense social and cultural stigma. Let us examine our first framework closer, Theory A. Theory A is a cultural, socio-spiritual Congress model. This framework argues that psychological healing happens when interventions align seamlessly with students' worldview. The core mechanism here is benevolent religious reframing. This is where a student reinterprets a painful crisis, like an academic failure or financial distress, not as random tragedy, but as purposeful spiritual test designed to build character. This model is highly accessible because it uses free, deeply trusted youth networks and community structures that provide an immediate collective shield against isolation. Moving on, Theory B, biopsychosocial care. In direct contrast, we have Theory B, the Biopsychosocial Clinic Support Model. This framework views depression objectively as a combination of neurobiological imbalances and maladaptive cognitive patterns. Rather than seeking community alignments, it relies on structured, evidence-based interventions like cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, delivered by trained professionals in a strictly neural and confidential environment. CBT works by teaching the students to identify, challenge, and disrupt their negative thought loops, focusing heavily on personal autonomy and rational problem solving. Looking into the methodological blind spots, when we evaluate the literature surrounding both theories, we run into major methodological blind spots. First, there is a severe lack of longitudinal tracking because most studies are cross-sectional. We have a classic chicken or the egg dilemma. We cannot definitely prove if religious coping causes recovery, or if students with healthier baselines simply have more energy to participate in faith groups. Furthermore, Western psychometric tools like the PHQ-9 focuses heavily on verbalized internal guilt. This creates a massive measurement bias in the Pacific, where psychological distress often presents somatically, excuse me, somatically through physical symptoms like severe fatigue, body aches, and tension headaches. Empirical comparison metrics. This data visualization brings the empirical comparison between the two models into sharp focus. As we can see, Theory A scores incredibly high on the cultural adherence and financial accessibility because it is embedded directly in the community at zero cost. On the other hand, Theory B is highly effective at rapid crisis stabilization, but it suffers from a critically low clinical retention rate, sitting at roughly 40%. This tells us that while clinical professionals have excellent tools, institutional alienation institutional alienation and intense fear of community gossip cause Fijian tertiary students to drop out of therapy prematurely. So Theory B is still viewed as an alien here in Fiji. Therefore, most students opt for religious coping rather than going to a formal institution or counseling at the university. Moving on, the religious coping risk. We must recognize that relying purely on religious coping carries a dangerous empirical risk. While benevolent reframing is highly protective, literature shows that it can easily flip into what is known as negative religious coping. This occurs when a student experiences a severe depressive episode and interprets it as a sign of divine punishment, spiritual abandonment, or personal sin. When this happens, the student's internal guilt and shame skyrockets because they have failed both their community and their creator. Their risk of severe suicidal ideation increases dramatically. Because neither framework operates perfectly on its own, the empirical data points us towards a logical, compassionate solution, a structural hybrid care model. Instead of keeping these systems separate, we must deliberately weave evidence-based clinical protocols directly into trusted, culturally familiar faith environments. By training spiritual leaders to recognize somatic symptoms and normalize professional help seeking, we can entirely strip away the social stigma of therapy. This allows students to receive structured cognitive tools while maintaining complete cultural and spiritual continuity. To remain scientifically objective, I must state the specific empirical conditions under which I would pivot away from this hybrid stance and endorse Theory B as a standalone solution. I would require a rigorous 18-month longitudinal study conducted across specific universities proving that culturally adapted secular CBT consistently outperforms faith-based coping on objective biological markers such as lowering salivary cortisol levels. Crucially, these future research must control for external confounding variables, including family income level, baseline personality types, and weekly hours of peer socialization. Pinaka, in conclusion, supporting the mental health of Fiji tertiary students require us to bridge the gap between modern clinical science and enduring cultural traditions. A hybrid framework ensures that no students have to sacrifice their cultural identity to achieve psychological wellness. Thank you very much for your time, and I welcome any questions or discussion on this research. Pinaka Wakalimu.